So how does a business, what are some ways a business can go about deliberately designing those incentive structures so that um, training rather than a bunch of, check boxes and hoops to run through, um, because of misaligned incentive structures becomes something where it's more like, how do we create, how do I word this? How do we create incentive structures, or how does a business create incentive structures so that the focus is on learner skill acquisition and competency that actually impacts a business's bottom line rather than piling more stuff into training because we need to check these boxes or a manager needs to feel like, what they think is important is part of the curriculum. And it just sort of becomes this disjointed series of hoops that a learner jumps through, that just keeps getting added to over time because it's like the business clearly has performance issues. All businesses have areas of improvement, areas for improvement. And none of them are being addressed through training, assuming they can be addressed through training if incentives are misaligned to begin with.
I think at an organizational scale, it is hard. It does mean everybody needs to be on the same page. It does mean that, there has to be some sort of, self-reflection and review, at a leadership level to decide on how to keep, a relatively, accurate and lean set of instructions and guidelines that you're trying to follow and not letting that bloat due to all of these other reasons, right? I do think like internally for us, um, for the team when let's say we're reviewing an update or something like that, the list of things that need to be reviewed is constantly growing. We're constantly adding new features,
Mhm.
and new
Mhm.
features lead to more bugs, and more bugs, have all sorts of like fixing a bug can cost another bug, right? And
Yeah.
there is this thing where as you're growing, you're trying to constantly also take the time to go back and simplify and go back and review. It is a lot of work and effort and checklist and design documents that you set up, even a few months ago might quickly be out of date as you're working on the next thing. And I think that is a big part of it is you do have to be constantly in design mode, in planning mode. And I think keeping that list, focused and lean and not falling into the trap of, okay, we put out this update, let's add a whole bunch of things to review. We put out the next update, there's a whole bunch more things that we should review next time. And then just having that list grow forever, is one of the ways that you can end up with these giant growing checklists. And let's say you onboard somebody new, and then you tell them, well, just go review these things. Here's all the things that we need to review, and you're just dumping a giant checklist on them, and you're not, you're if you look at it that way, I think there's all these reasons why you're going to add more to the checklist, and you're scared to take them off the checklist. Think about something that really went wrong, and you just realize like, at what point can you safely say, hey, we're going to reduce the number of things? How are we going to reduce it? Like, just think about it, like how often and how hard, how easy is it to, it's easy to add things because you can always be more careful, you can always be more something, but at what point do you start removing things from a checklist? It actually is kind of scary because
Okay. So, well, even on the checklist idea itself, like that is a list of steps or procedures or things that you need to do to follow, but that's not actually training on how to do them well. And that's not assessing somebody on whether or not they're able to do it effectively or well. Like if it's a pretty basic thing, like check X, Y, or Z, or flip this switch or whatever, you could maybe do some sort of assessment to actually watch them observe that they know where to find said switch and flip it correctly. But when you start getting into some things that are a little bit more nuanced or complicated, I mean, a checklist in of itself, regardless of how large or how small, is not training, and it is not a form of assessment to determine whether or not that person can competently complete that task.
I think
So
it is, it is one of the most common types of documents we see coming in, right? A training checklist. Like who doesn't have a training checklist?
yeah,
So I think it is a starting point, and I think it definitely is I think for a lot of people it's better than nothing, right? And then there is the
yep,
question of, well, what do you turn it into? Well, how does this thing evolve into something different? And I think like we've seen checklists of checklists, like one item is you're on the training checklist. Okay, did you go check the onboarding checklist? And there's another 50 items on the onboarding checklist, right?
yeah,
I think, in a lot of ways, training does become sort of a checklist, and it follows all of the same issues when you're adding to it. Oh, we can train them in this, we can train them on this, or this guy really screwed this one thing up, 2 years ago. We got to make sure everybody is trained on this, and let's add another 5 items. I think it's very normal to just keep on growing the checklist. And then I think it is also, it's a way that it's a relatively low effort way, and you're mostly putting the weight of that onto the training manager, the manager of that person, right? It's like that checklist grows, just puts more and more work on the manager who's responsible for training that person. So I think it is an effort, whether it's a training checklist or a compliance checklist or something else like that, to add more to it. And to leave it sort of at that, I think then you could say, okay, we talk all about how these checklists grow out of hand, and there's all these reasons. There's a lot of reasons for checklists to grow. There's not a lot of reasons for checklists to shrink. And then what can you do? What can you do as an alternative to this instead of making a checklist that gets kicked down the road for the manager to take care of, right?